balls of light. There's a ghost now.
All right, hola everyone. Welcome and broadcasting from the Napa Valley wine country just outside the mystical Sonoma Mountains. This is Beyond the Strange. I am your host, Dave Cruz. Thank you for joining us today. It is Sunday, February 10th, 2019. And we have a fantastic show for you tonight. Preston Dennett will be joining us here in just a little bit. But first, just a couple of words, announcements. Follow us on Twitter at Strange Days 2015, trending with the hashtag Beyonders for posts, comments, or questions for the show. And if you want more of BTS after the show is over, hang out over at the Beyonders chat Discord channel, where there are plenty of fringe topics to discuss with a friend or to get more information about certain subjects. Ask for an invite to the Discord channel or go to beyondthestrange.com. And on the main page there is a Discord link that'll get you hooked up to the Beyonders chat Discord room. And make sure to subscribe to the Beyond the Strange YouTube channel. Remember to set your alerts. If you want to receive new notifications of videos and live streams, please hit that like button after the video or during the video. Actually, do me a favor, just hit the like button. and yeah, that'd be really great. So hit that like button and leave comments. You know, anything helps. If you want to know more about a subject, want to add to a topic, go ahead and leave a comment. Questions for Preston if you want, and we'll get those questions to Preston during the show or even after the show, and we'll get his information hooked up on the beyondthestrange.com webpage. So you can go to his links and you can interact with Preston there as well. Let's see. Also, you want to find the show on Facebook, Instagram, and Google Plus, all under Beyond the Strange. You can also find the podcast of the show later on iTunes, Google Play, Spreaker, Stitcher. And please remember to leave a like for the show and hit that follow button. Please hit that follow button, because you want to get the latest and greatest of the show. So remember to do that. And again, there's always reviews and comments if you want to leave for the show. Future guests, more information about topics, just go ahead and do that. That'd be awesome. Keep checking the Beyond Strange website for future updates, merchandise, giveaways, and prizes. And you can show your support for the show by going to beyondthestrange.com and clicking on the support us tab at the top of the page. And you can click the donation button. Remember, anything helps. And also you can go there, and there's a link there for CBD oil products, and all proceeds go right back into the show. So you definitely support the show those two ways, and either way would be wonderful. So thank you so much in advance. And hey, I'll give you a shout out over the air on the live show. So do that. That'd be wonderful. And I appreciate everything. I appreciate all you guys following the show, who have followed the show, as a matter of fact, who take the time to leave a like or a comment. I think it's great, and keep doing that. It's wonderful. I really do appreciate that. All right, enough of all that. Let's get down to the nitty gritty. We want to speak to Preston Dennett. Preston Dennett began investigating UFOs and paranormal in 1986, when he discovered that his family, friends, and coworkers were having dramatic and unexplained encounters. Since then, he's interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomenon. Preston is a field investigator for MUFON, a ghost hunter, paranormal researcher and the author of more than 20 books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and the paranormal. His articles have appeared in numerous magazines, including Fate magazine, Atlantis Rising, the MUFON Journal, Nexus Paranormal magazine, UFO Mystery magazine, UFOligists magazine, and others. Preston's writings have been translated into several different languages, including German, French, Portuguese, Russian, and Icelandic. He's appeared on numerous different television and radio programs, including Midnight in the Desert with Art Bell, Coast to Coast, AM, and also History Channel's Deep Sea UFOs and UFO Hunters. His research has been presented in the LA Times and LA Daily News, the Dallas Morning News, and other newspapers. Preston has taught classes on various paranormal subjects, and he's lectured all across the United States. He currently resides in Southern California, and I believe you can go to prestondennett.weebly.com. Please, everyone, help me welcome Mr. Preston Dennett. Preston, thank you for joining the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Preston, for being here tonight. So much to talk about, and believe it or not, sometimes 2 hours is not enough. It just flies right by. So I just want to thank you again. And what got you into all this? I mean, I saw, you know, in your bio that it had to do with family and friends. And did it start by them coming to you and saying, "Hey, what do you think about this?" or "What do you know about this?"
Yeah, I mean, sure wasn't looking for it. I was really skeptical. I remembered very, very vividly. It's a story I've told many times about, hearing this report in the news, but finding out that, my brother had chased a UFO, and, my sister-in-law saw a UFO with 2 friends. People at work had seen it. I had a best friend who had a missing time.
Oh, wow.
A person at work had missing time. Another person was describing entity encounters. And these were all people that I'd known for, a very long time.
Right.
Some were family. So this was bad news as far as I was concerned. Because, it wasn't taught in schools. It shook me up. It really did. I started examining my whole past. Like, gosh, have I been abducted? Geez, I don't think so. I can't point to anything. But you hear this stuff and you're like, what is going on? How come no one's talking about this? And so I really became obsessed with it. And I'm not sure why. It kind of just pushed me over the edge a little bit. But geez, I just can't let it go.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that once you start really getting into the subject, I don't really want to call it a rabbit hole, because I believe it's more than that. And I believe that, we have been visited, we are being visited, and that we are totally not just, I mean, since I've been doing this, you've been doing it much longer than me, but since I've been doing this, I just find it that it's changed my life. So it's a life-changing thing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you have to really reevaluate things. In a weird way, I became more skeptical because I couldn't believe that, this had slipped by me and was all going on, and I didn't know it for years and years and years. And to find out that there's, really mountains of evidence supporting this subject, there's no doubt it's real. I mean, if you look at it and evaluate the evidence objectively, hands down, you can't really come away with any other conclusion that there's definitely something going on.
How do we find? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's basically my point. People are underestimating how much evidence is really out there.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to sort of move on beyond trying to prove this subject, which we have. What more evidence do you need than, thousands of landing trace cases and implant evidence and films with radar returns and multiple eyewitness testimony supported by lie detector tests and government documents. And, I mean, I can go on. Medical evidence. We haven't even gotten into that.
No, and there is all kinds of evidence. As a matter of fact, at one of the events that I ran into you at up here in San Francisco, California, there was a booth. I don't know if you got a chance to look, but there was a booth where a gentleman was performing implant detection. And so, you know, right there, I feel that that's definitely part of the evidence. Dr. Greer, was it Dr. Greer?
Dr. Lear.
Dr. Lear. I'm sorry, I keep getting those two.
Hey, they rhyme.
They do. Greer, Lear. But Dr. Lear, being one of the first to show that evidence of implants, and who knows, may have actually paid the price for it. You never know what happens to researchers, or and then I mean, do you worry about stuff like that, or do you just continue doing your work like, hey, I don't care?
Well, I waver here and there. Initially, I was so gung-ho with this subject. I was ready to die for it, and go ahead, threaten me. And I did receive a threat once.
Wow.
I did. Some guy called me up during the Topanga Canyon UFO wave. That was 1992 to 1994, really. And this guy calls me. He's from the military, he says. He's got a top secret clearance. And he basically says, "You're barking up the wrong tree here." And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "It's not what you think it is." I'm like, "Okay, well, what is it?" And he says, "There's no pay dirt. No, it's dangerous." That's what he said. It's dangerous. You don't know what you're getting into.
Mm.
So, which is, a veiled threat.
Right.
And then he changes tactics and says, "There's no pay dirt in it anyway," which makes me think, well, how can it be dangerous then?
You're right. Exactly.
That doesn't make sense. So it was kind of weird, but it makes me uncomfortable a little bit to know that I might be being, watched or surveilled. I've had a lot of phone problems. My mail, when back when they had mail, really, a lot of it came back opened. It was a real problem.
What?
And I was able to show people. I'm like, you open my mailbox. My mailbox is locked. By the way, I lived in a condominium complex.
Uh-huh.
And I'd send out, all kinds of articles and books. I was trying to get all this UFO material.
Sure, right.
And a lot of it came back open, and it started to really annoy me because I couldn't really decide if this was, what was happening here. Is this intentional? Some of it was ripped open. Some just kind of opened.
That is so uncool.
And emails. I've had email problems, and emails are probably a little bit easier for official agencies maybe to surveil because they go through the whole electronic system there, the internet.
Right.
But yeah, so it makes me a little uncomfortable, but it doesn't bother me that much. My research is all available. I'm trying to make it available as fast as I can.
Mm-hmm.
I've got nothing to hide. In fact, I'm really vocal about it. I don't want to hide it. So you know what I mean? So I've really got nothing to hide.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, yeah. And also, I didn't get involved in this thinking, I thought it's going to be fun. This should be interesting. To find out it's all cloak and dagger, it draws a lot of, all kinds of different groups. People are really emotional about it sometimes. There's a group of people who are very skeptical and will attack you.
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't quite prepared for that. There are people who are absolutely over the edge with the subject and have let it almost, affect them in a way that's mentally unhealthy.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's putting it mildly, as a matter of fact.
I'm trying to be nice.
Right, exactly. And it's like, I see a lot of people's passion, like with these conferences that we go to. The people that come in and out, and they just want to know more about what's happening and why is all of this happening.
But all these different groups. There's other groups that are. We have the skeptics, right? They attack you. Mm-hmm. People who are just over the edge with it, and people who are truly interested, who are having contact. like you said, have to sort of wade through another group, which is just trying to make money off of the subject. And then there's another group, which is actively providing disinformation. So it's a very strange subject to get involved in. I really wasn't expecting all those different sort of push-pull and, this mirror and, just a maze of
Mhm.
stuff going on.
Well, let's get back to some of the evidence that we were talking about. And have you ever got to hold any type of material or evidence or analyze anything that UFOs might be made of? The ships or anything like that?
An actual have I held a metal sample? Don't think so.
Mhm.
I've held an implant once. I've been close to some of that.
Okay.
And that's mostly of the type of physical evidence I've seen. I've seen crushed grass and some landing traces. Nothing that I was able to really, pin down as being truly UFO in my own personal case.
Mhm.
Probably the best piece of evidence that I had, it was, not what the ships are made of, which I think we do have an idea because there has been metal samples, titanium and things like this.
Right.
Magnesium, I believe. But there was the Uba-Tuba fragment and others. But me personally, not too long ago, this lady from the Midwest,
Mhm.
she and her teenage son, well, they contacted me because they went to the dentist to take x-rays for him as they had, done through the years. But these x-rays showed an apparent implant under his back molar. And it was weird because this thing was like bigger than a BB, but it looked kind of like a BB, a marble,
Right.
perhaps.
Mhm.
And right directly under the molar. It's impossible. The tooth was fine. There was no entry wound.
Mhm.
But the dentist, of course, the whole office there was freaking out. And they're like, well, did you shoot yourself in the mouth? Which was a ridiculous explanation.
Yeah, of course.
And they both, of course, denied it. And so they sent me this x-rays because they're like, what could this be? Could this be? And they're looking it up on the internet and finally, tracked me down and sent me the x-ray. And I interviewed him extensively. At first, they denied any UFO history at all.
Mhm.
Said, no sightings, nothing's happened to us, no. But persistent questioning, did reveal that the son did have an encounter.
Okay.
And he's pretty upset about it, didn't want to talk about it. I never interviewed him directly.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, he and his friend had this UFO hover right over them. And I'm like, well, that's when it happened because it was right before they went to this dentist. I sent this x-ray off to a couple of other medical professionals, an emergency physician and another doctor.
Right.
And both diagnosed it as a foreign body and both said, did they shoot themselves in the mouth?
Wow.
Which no, I mean, if you see this object, I mean, it's bigger than a BB.
Right.
Much bigger.
I mean, what are the chances of it lodging perfectly underneath your tooth or cap or whatever, and not going into your out your cheek or that's, I don't know, that it's kind of ridiculous.
Right. So they're dealing with this, and she was obsessed with finding out what this could possibly be, and really kept pestering me. Sent me more X-rays. They went back again, and the son admitted to having a real kind of obsession with Nordic type ETs, but the whole subject scared him real bad.
Okay.
And she calls me up. This was, last year. The Greys came and visited her and her son. She saw them hovering over his bed, and she was in this kind of semi-awake state where they said, "Don't be afraid. Everything's fine. We're not going to hurt you. Everything's going to be just fine." Which is, always what they say. But for her, it was incredible validation, and I was kind of expecting something like this to happen, or probably already have happened. And she did start to remember stuff. So it was kind of blocked when she saw me, but she started to remember other visitations in the past, and later had a second visitation with mantids, very tall, praying mantis type ETs, with another person on the craft. Apparently, it was interesting. She said because they had set up the craft to almost look like her living room.
Oh, wow.
She kept having the impression she was in her living room, but
Screen memory, right?
I'm not exactly sure what's going on here.
Okay.
But yeah, something of that nature for sure. They're doing something, I think, to make her look more comfortable is kind of the impression she got.
Oh, okay.
But she's like,
Right.
the walls were all round, and there was light coming from all over the place, and I couldn't tell where, and other things that I often hear people say. She said, yeah, they were real tall, 6. She said, no, it's over 6 feet, like 8 feet tall. I believe she said, or nine even. I'd have to.
That's
look
incredible.
That up,
That's very
but she
tall.
remembers just looking up. So yeah, I mean, that's a good case because that has physical evidence that we can't explain.
Sure.
And the kid's really bright, has a lot of psychic precognition, and seems just unusually sensitive. So it's pretty interesting. I think that's one of the reasons why he's having this sort of experience.
Where do most of these sightings occur to you, Preston? I mean, are they near? I've heard that some are near bodies of water, others are in the mountains. I mean, I'm assuming it's just about everywhere. For you, where do you think that they appear the most?
Well, there's been a lot of research done into this for sure.
Okay.
We know that California does have the most reports, which sort of corresponds with the population being, the largest population center in the United States.
Mm.
So we know that most UFOs are seen where the people are, which is kind of obvious, but they're seen everywhere for sure. There's, you can go to the most remote locations and find sightings, to the very most crowded locations. So in terms of like rural areas as opposed to urban, there's not a huge pattern there. Most of my sightings come from suburban areas because, of course, that's where people are. There are things that are UFO attractors. I think we know that for sure. Factories, mines with metal in them, any type of nuclear installation, or Air Force base, dams. These are all UFO attractors. They're very interested in, the power sources. I wrote about this, in fact, in my books, Not From Here.
Okay.
And did a big study on like rocket launches. That definitely attracts UFOs. They seem to be very interested in that. Another would be graveyards. I had no idea that was a thing. But geez, there must be 20, 30 cases of UFOs not only hovering over graveyards, but we're talking landings, and in several cases humanoids, and in some cases these graves are actually being disturbed. I mean, that was what was going on in
really
in West Virginia at this one graveyard. The sightings were so regular that they could pretty much predict when UFOs would come, because anytime they'd bury someone new, the UFOs would show up. And so, yeah, I mean, I've got a case in France, cases up in
what is that about?
Canada. It's weird, right? It's a little.
That's the first time I've heard it, to be honest.
Yeah, cases from J. Allen Hynek, cases from Jim and Coral Lorenzen, Ray Fowler. These are all the pioneers of UFO research, all contributed cases of this type. And I don't know what's going on, but my first guess is, to put it bluntly, extraterrestrial grave robbers. I think there's something there that's interesting them. And what else could it be besides genetic material?
I see. Yeah, that's true.
Another person brought up, I think it was Scott Corrales, who actually wrote about this too, another researcher, that could be related to implants or implant retrievals, which I thought was an interesting idea. And I've heard other theories, soul retrieval. I don't know. It's bizarre for sure, but it's definitely a thing. I found another one that I wrote about prisons, that they hover over all kinds of prisons. Yeah, bodies of water for sure. We do get a lot of reports there over telephone wires. They love to chase cars down the street, especially remote highways, late at night. A lot of reports of that. So they're
That's scary.
these we call UFO tractors. Mostly they've picked the people they want to have contact with, and these people are experiencers, contactees and abductees,
Hmm.
and they have repeated contact. That's accounts for maybe half the sightings. I don't know. I'm only guessing,
Sure.
but certainly a lot, as a lot of people don't have contact, but still have sightings, of course.
Hmm.
And it's really hard to predict. I think that probably some of the best predictors would be rocket launches for sure. I mean, I've got cases where people launched toy rockets and UFOs actually showed up to investigate those, which,
Like the model rocket type.
yeah, a case of in Arizona
Okay.
or Nevada,
Uh-huh.
and another one in upstate New York. This father was launching toy rockets for his kids, and UFOs showed up to investigate, which tells me that, yeah, they're watching our rocket launches and they're watching them really closely.
They're there. Yeah.
To be able to detect that, I mean, that's crazy. And it's not the only one. So I'm like, wow, And yeah, those rocket launches stretch back to from very early to the present day.
Right.
So they're definitely keeping an eye on us.
They're definitely watching us when we were shooting for the moon and all that stuff.
For sure.
Challenger. And do you think that they might have been responsible for some of the causes of maybe rocket mislaunches and that kind of thing? I mean, do they have that capability to kind of, bat us down, sort of?
Yeah, they sure do. And we saw that at Malmstrom,
Okay.
where they turned off all those nuclear missiles.
Right.
They didn't bat them down, but they turned them off. But we did see that in 1964 at Vandenberg Air Force Base, according to not only Dr. David Jacobs,
Mm-hmm.
who filmed it, but his superior, Major Mansman, was dying of cancer and said the whole incident was true on his deathbed, which basically involved this launch of this Atlas, I believe it was an Atlas missile, and it's flying up its way up there, and this UFO shows up, and David Jacobs, Dr. David Jacobs,
Mm-hmm.
not the researcher, but someone who's working at the base,
Okay.
films this thing, and this object sends out 3 beams of light, boom, boom, boom,
Wow.
disables the missile. It's a very famous case,
Uh-huh.
and the missile goes tumbling away. And there's another case that was much later. I believe it was a Chinese rocket, same type of thing. A UFO comes right across the rocket, and then it fails right before it's about to launch its satellite.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, it has happened in scattered cases. Mostly they seem to just observe and not interfere, but they can and have interfered in rocket launches. Yes.
Did you notice anything in the recent launches for Elon Musk's rockets? Were you paying attention to that by any chance?
Where he launched his car into space. That one? I remember
that. Wasn't like at a heavy metal the scene from the movie Heavy Metal? I don't know if you've ever seen that before. Or not.
Yeah, I have seen it. It was years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. That was like back in early 80s, I think.
I haven't been watching it too closely. No, I'm noticing this privatizing of space, which I find kind of interesting. And I do believe there's a lot that's going on that we don't hear about in terms of secrecy and what our exploration of space. It's hard to say. I've only talked to a few whistleblowers here and there. I mean, one guy, he did contact me from a hospital and said he had this story. He wanted to get off his chest before he died. And it was, a pretty heavy duty story. He had worked as a subcontractor for Edwards Air Force Base, which, as you may know, is where we do a lot of testing for high-level aircraft and has attracted UFOs since 1947 onward. There was a huge incident in 1965 involving a bunch of people in radar lock-ons. There was, of course, the Eisenhower meeting in 1954, was it? Around there, where he supposedly met with ETs.
Right. Was that the treaty or the agreement that they could only like take so many people or something like that?
Right. And bunches of sightings. I put a whole chapter on this in my book, UFOs over California, on just, Edwards, because it's neck deep. I mean, there's reports of people working with ETs and humans together, independent reports.
Okay.
And that this base goes 50 feet down, la, la, la. A lot of stuff is the point. So this guy contacts me and he's got an Edwards story. I'm like, wow, okay. And he said that he was walking along there with his, the person who was employing him. And they turn and there's this warehouse and it's opened. And he sees this typical flying saucer, small, maybe 10, 20 feet across, bright silver, featureless, but floating. And he's like, wow, what's that? And the guy he's working for won't answer him and pretends to ignore him basically, and makes it clear that he's not supposed to see or talk about this. And they, get into a private place, and he says, what was that? And the guy still won't answer. Says, I can't talk about it. Don't ask me. So, and he did the job, and that was it. He thought for years until the guy calls him back and says, I really, really need you for another job. And the guy who contacted me says, I'm not doing it unless you tell me what we saw. And the guy did. He said, yes. All right. That was reverse engineering.
Okay.
That was something we made from alien technology. So that tells me that we probably are flying this stuff around. I've been told that before, that some of the stuff people are seeing is military. And I would say, around military bases, particularly like Area 51, for sure. Some of those are human piloted craft, but probably a few more than just that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we're not just talking stealth bombers and that kind of thing. I mean, definitely the architecture of those type of planes do remind me of spaceships, that, and who knows, that could have been inspired by alien technology. But when you say reverse engineering, I think of what they call that 0 point gravity type machines that don't necessarily run on rocket fuel or fuel in the sense as what our planes run on, but some type of other energy source.
Yeah, no doubt. ETs, when people are taken on board a craft, they're given messages sometimes. And one of the groups of messages, they fall into three main categories, one being warnings, another being like healing and spirituality. But one is all about that, ET engines. People are taken to the engine room. It happened to Charles Moody, a very famous abduction case. They basically took him to the engine room and told him how it works and said, you can understand this if you take time. And I hear this quite a bit from people I've interviewed. I think there's sort of a grassroots movement on the ET's part to get us away from fossil fuels. And this energy, if we have this technology, what a travesty that it hasn't been released, because we could solve this global warming problem and not have to use fossil fuels. But is that going to happen because of the oil companies? We've got a real problem on our hands here with this whole UFO situation. And I'm really interested to see how it all finally breaks out in terms of the technology that's being suppressed, one,
right?
In terms of, our government's denials, in terms of what we're actually doing now. Are we exploring other planets, other star systems? There's so many levels to this that it's got to bust open. There's just no way to keep this in the bag anymore.
I keep hearing that like every year, that this is the year of disclosure and this is going to be, of course, I feel that we've already had disclosure. There's no doubt about it. You know? But in the sense of, I always go back to the scenario of the White House lawn, all the reporters around, we got a podium, and then, little green guy comes up and starts talking to us. I don't think that we're going to exactly get that. But do you think we'll get something close to it, something more official than us already knowing that this is happening?
Yeah, I mean, eventually we will. If this is a true subject, and we know it is,
Right.
it's gonna happen. I don't think the UFOs are gonna go away. I don't think that's really a viable option. So what we're probably gonna get is some more, like the Pentagon disclosure. They showed us a film
Mhm.
and they gave us eyewitness testimony, which we already have, but this came from a pretty official source. So that was good. It was not enough, obviously, but we're probably going to get, maybe a piece of metal next that we can look at from behind a glass case,
Right.
or something like that. I would imagine it's going to be how it starts to push forward. So I would be interested to see that. I imagine we will get more films and eyewitness testimonies before that happens. I don't know. We've had very high level officials already say this is a real subject.
Right.
So I do think if the president of the United States or any of the major superpowers, so to speak, were to just say it flat out while in office, not like Governor Fife Symington did, left office, became a baker, and said, "Yeah, I saw the Phoenix Lights,"
Right.
which is still huge. Don't get me wrong; he's a governor of a state. But we need a person in office at a very high level to say this is true, and that would be a huge step. And they don't even have to do anything really. I mean, it would just create really a lot of talk and blow over, but it would kind of push the subject to a new level where it's not at yet. And I think we will see that. I think that is going to happen. Maybe not from the United States, but who knows? There's a lot of countries out there.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah, no doubt.
and what if one of these things, what if the Phoenix Lights happens again, except people are ready, with their cell cameras, or what? Because that is going to happen again. We see these waves of sightings regularly. Stevensville is the last real big wave that reached the threshold to get nationwide or multinational headlines, and we haven't had one since. Not really, at least not a big one. And I'm expecting that because that comes every 5 years or so, it seems like. And I could just go through this whole list of waves we've had. Phoenix Lights was one of them.
Right.
But there was, the Gulf Breeze wave. That was huge. The Hudson Valley wave, another big one. There was a huge wave in Belgium. And you can go back through history. There was in the 1950s, this was giant wave of all across France. Mexico City had a huge wave during the eclipse of 1990, 4 or something? I forget what it was, around there. Or 91, actually. And there was, of course, a wave of sightings in Topanga Canyon. So I'm expecting another one of those. And that could be the one that really shakes things up a little bit beyond where they are now.
When you say waves, and I just for clarity, do you mean the amount of UFOs in one sighting or the amount of sightings in one location?
I would define a wave as kind of a disproportionately large number of sightings in a defined area.
Okay.
So this can be one or two objects, but often these areas, flap areas, have been sometimes called, have multiple objects. I mean, lots of UFOs being seen by lots of different witnesses, and there's some possibility that waves can be artificially formed as sort of a social structure where one person reports it and another one does and another one does, and suddenly we have a media blitz of activity that's been already going on for some time. I think that probably does happen in some cases, but not usually. I think waves are a real phenomena where ETs, and that's what I think we're dealing with here, are showing themselves off on purpose. They're putting on a display. The reason I say that is because normally when people see UFOs, it's like at night, and it's brief, and the object comes down and it darts away, or doesn't stay for a very long time. It's only in front of a few people, perhaps. But these waves are like, no, they're in your face. They're brazen. They want to be seen clearly.
Sure.
So, yeah, I'm, I, I I think that's definitely going to continue. And it's sort of their campaign towards open official disclosure, which really hasn't happened yet, probably because of our own warlike ways. Or at least this is what they've told contactees.
Of course.
And when they're taken on board, that is one of the reasons, that we pollute our planet, that we have so many disagreements, that we're very violent. These sort of reasons, I think, are among many that are preventing open official disclosure.
Before we go to our break at the top of the hour, which is in less than 15 minutes, I wanted to see if there was some questions in the chat room, since a lot of people are there seems to be some really good activity, a lot of great comments in there, and some of them have to deal with underwater UFOs and that sort of thing. When we talk about the species of these extraterrestrials, you mentioned already the mantis ones and the grays. Of course, there's also more humanoid or human-looking ones like Nordics, or I don't know if Pleiadians fall into that category as well. But my big question is, what do you know about reptilians or Dracos, or are they even the same species?
Well, I think the terms are used interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
No one's really kind of made a taxonomy of the reptilians or the
Right.
reptoids or whatever you want to call them.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't had really any personal cases of reptilians
Mm-hmm.
where people have come to me and reported these types of beings. That's not to say I haven't talked to people who've had those kinds of encounters at various conventions and things.
Mm-hmm.
So I do believe that no, actually, I did have a lady who had a reptilian encounter. Now that I think of it, that's relatively recently. She had it in Florida.
Okay. Oh,
And
they have been spotted mainly in Florida too, from what I gather.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And
Yeah. Well,
she's
Florida's weird anyway. So
yeah, it was.
a lot of crazy stuff happens there. Mm-hmm.
This was in the Everglades. She was a young kid. She's had a number of encounters throughout her life. Her family's kind of steeped in the whole UFO thing. They've had a lot of encounters,
right,
with beings and missing time and the whole deal. And she's out behind her house and hiking through there, and she sees this very tall reptilian, who she said, I believe it had an armor plate on and like boots. She couldn't really tell because she was very frightened by it. And they locked eyes. She came right on it, and it was just suddenly there. And it was very threatening to her, kind of made a threatening gesture, growling and kind of coming towards her.
Mm-hmm.
And she just turned and ran. She said she never ran faster in her life and didn't look back. But she described, your typical reptilian. I don't get a lot of reptilian cases for whatever reason. Most, from my understanding, seem to be hostile or not friendly in the sense that we call it. But certainly I've talked to some people who had very friendly encounters with them, totally benevolent. And it's one of the main types, I think, that people do report. For me, it's mostly grays. I have to be honest, it really is. Some variation of that, at least 50%, probably more, closer to 60 perhaps. I'm getting more and more human looking. I get a lot of mantids, and those vary too, as do the human looking. Some are, what we would call white, others, like Scandinavian with blonde hair, blue eyes.
Right, Nordics.
Another was described, this guy I interviewed, I wrote about this in my book, Inside UFOs. This man I interviewed, Stan Hughes, had an encounter where this object landed in front of him on the road, and out steps this really handsome looking guy in a tight jumpsuit, silver boots, and he looked Middle Eastern, had long hair, dark skin, dark eyes. but very, kind of genetically perfect and very muscular.
Mm-hmm.
How these witnesses usually describe these beings.
Sure.
But this guy had, the darker skin. And I had another case, which I wrote about in my book, Undersea UFO Base, which occurred right along the beach here, involving, this was like 1997 or so, not too long ago, at, gosh, I forget the name of it, Leo Carrillo Beach. And
Okay.
and other people saw these humanoids, which looked human. They were 5 feet tall, basically normal looking, except all looked very similar. And he described them as maybe Mesoamerican, Peruvian, perhaps Mexican, South American.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't be sure, but not your typical white dude, so to speak. So I mean, you get all different colors.
Right.
Is the point? And I got reports that are like, you can't really categorize them. How, like an 8-foot tall orange humanoid with a broad chin, huge forehead, and orange spiky hair. Not human, but not, gosh, I mean, any certain type. And you get a bunch of those. That's a whole category, a good 10, 20%. Occasionally robotic creatures. Almost always pretty much always a humanoid form, even if it's robotic, which is weird to me. I mean, that you would have, even robots would be humanoid looking. But yeah, that's what we get. And the humanoid form seems to be pretty much universal with terms of eyes, nose, mouth, ears, head, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a trunk. You get that a lot. Now you can have variations that tend towards various animals. Sometimes people have told me they see that beings look almost cat-like, or like a horse-like face I heard once, or bug-like, the praying mantis, of course.
Yes, right.
Or ant-like, or insectoid, which I find interesting because you don't get like giraffe-like, or we have a lot of animals. None of them say it looks like a peacock, or you could pick just about any animal,
panda or something.
right? No, but no elephants or ostriches. It's praying mantis, which we do have. So I find that kind of interesting. That would be such a big type, and that we have an animal that does relate to that.
Could be that it's what's more local, if you will, in our galaxy or that kind of area, that we are seeing more and more familiar types of species of extraterrestrials.
Yeah, it's all very Star Trek. I'd heard about aliens, of course, growing up. When I was skeptical, I'd be like, yeah, right. I mean, because aliens I thought were going to be very different from us. But it's more logical, as if you think about it, they would be similar to us. Because what are we? I mean, we're aliens to someone else. I don't know. It's really hard to say, but that's the story we're stuck with. And I think like there's a lot more aliens out there than people realize.
Sure.
It's not just 3 or 4 types. I mean, if you look through the literature, it's a never-ending parade of types of aliens. It's very hard to categorize. Not only the aliens themselves, but their ships, for that matter. You have triangles, you have spheres, you have hexagonal, square, pyramidal, saucer-shaped for sure, manta ray, all kinds of stuff. It goes on. I get mostly saucer-shaped, I would say. Cigar-shaped. Oval-shaped. But yeah, I mean, you get these weird reports sometimes. I remember one report, this guy was trying to describe it. He says, well, it wasn't, a 5-sided figure or a hexagon, but because all the sides were different lengths, but it was not symmetrical, which is...
It's like trapezoid or something.
But no, I mean, yeah, I guess a trapezoid, right? Because it was, all the sides were different.
Right.
It was bizarre because that's not how we build things. We like our stuff symmetrical.
Sure.
And
aerodynamic.
Most UFOs are actually. But they have a lot of colored lights on them. That's another thing that I find very interesting. Because at some point, I mean, I remember actually the very point, this lady had this UFO landing outside her house at Topanga Canyon. This was during that wave of sightings. She says, Preston, it was lit up like a Christmas tree, which, you know, I've heard before.
Sure.
I'm like, no, well, tell me. I mean, what do you mean? She says, well, I mean, there was a red lights on it. There was blue lights. There was green lights. It was covered with colored lights. It was beautiful. And that's when I realized that these lights are literally Christmas lights. I mean, come on. What's the function of them? That I really started to ask that question at that point, right?
Okay.
So, and what I found was kind of interesting because mostly UFOs don't have a lot of lights on them, but they can turn them on. And when they do that, people stare at them transfixed, and often they get abducted. So I think it's sort of a device in some cases, to entrance people.
Hypnotic.
Or to just be noticed.
Uh-huh.
Or maybe they like fancy cars and, you know, they like to deck them out like we do. Because they do show off and they're dancing around in these waves in front of people at times, like, look what we can do.
Right.
I don't know. It's weird. I don't think all these lights are like necessarily have a utility,
Right.
a use.
Yeah.
Like a sensing device, maybe. I could see that. There is some indication that, you know, a UFO will sometimes like turn red when it's coming in and blue as it takes off. We've got a number of cases like that, which indicate sort of a power source. So could have something to do with that, but mostly I'm thinking these guys are decorating their things out to make it look beautiful.
Pimp my ride. Pimp my ship.
for whatever reason.
Right.
Don't know, but it's, you know, that's a question I would like answered, which I don't think we really know the answer to.
I wonder if they're blasting space rock music or something while they're cruising along. Hey, you never know. Yeah, they might be.
You know, people don't hear music aboard UFOs. Sorry. It's not, you know, I did hear a lady who said the UFO was playing computer-like music, different tones. So that does happen.
Interesting. I was just kidding when I said that, but that's an important
but I mean, like, there's no artwork on the walls of UFOs, but they're pretty pastel colors. Everything looks very clean. You know, the light blue or the pastel green with silver trim on the benches, and, you know, that sort of thing. These guys do have a nice aesthetic sense of design, and people do see symbols on the walls occasionally.
Okay.
But in terms of like artwork or music, or, you know, the really kind of human type things, we don't see that. They do wear clothes, and people have seen designs on that.
That is what interests me, is that some of these ETs have uniforms.
Yeah, I'd say probably,
if you will, or maybe their skin is just that color, or have designs on them. I don't know.
Even, you know, reports of people who said, "Oh, well, I didn't see a uniform; they appeared naked." I'm guessing not. That the uniform is just very skin tight,
right,
and very grayish, perhaps, because we don't see any like genitalia. We don't see like nipples or, you know, things like that.
Sure.
Almost never. So I think they're usually wearing uniforms. Often they'll have, you know, little cuffs and things. Sometimes there'll be a symbol on the right chest or left, or generally there are no buttons, no zippers, nothing like that. Usually no helmets in terms of, you know, breathing devices, but that does turn up. Helmets, yes, but like not a full-on fishbowl type of thing, which, you know, still does happen.
Oh, right.
But yeah, masks are not at all uncommon, or not even be able to see the face. They'll have the face completely covered, like, you know, with some sort of cloth, perhaps, that's not see-through. That's not uncommon at all. It's very interesting. Tunics, you know, robes, occasionally with collars that stick out, and, you know, but no sense of fashion in terms of its, you know, pictures on the clothes and words and that sort of thing.
Right.
Like we do, or stripes, or, well, stripes. Yeah, there is cases with, you know, stripes going across the uniform, that sort of thing.
Oh, really? Okay.
But so, yeah, I mean, there's some of that.
Some of these guys have capes and stuff like that too, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. The cape does turn up periodically. and I've gotten a couple of those myself.
Oh,
From
wow.
people reporting caped beings.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes, for that matter, I mean, they'll dress up. I have reports of, particularly with kids, coming as, I'm not sure if this is screen memory or if these guys are actually dressing up in some cases, but they'll come dressed as clowns.
I've heard that, yes.
Or superheroes, I heard once, this guy was telling me. And
interesting.
one lady's like, oh, they came and they were 3 foot tall teddy bears walking towards me. She's describing them, and suddenly she saw through it that they were actually really grays.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, all kinds of screen memories. One guy said he kept seeing them as deer in his backyard.
I've heard that too. Yeah.
Which, I've heard many times.
Yeah, that's possible.
Owls, of course, comes up.
Yes, owls. There's a gentleman that does a lot about owls. I think
Mike Cleland.
Mike Cleland, right? I talked to him before, and he really makes that a point that owls are messengers, but they also have come in as ETs who transform into these owls, and very interesting and very, very cool person.
It's weird. The whole owl thing is weird, isn't it? One lady's like, yeah, I saw this owl on it. This has something to do with it. I don't know if it does or not, but it was 3 foot tall and it was standing there in front of the
big owl.
The road in front of our car in front of us, and it wouldn't move.
Yeah, they're big. They are big. I mean, I've seen them in real life too, and I've seen them in the snow. Big white owls. I've seen big owls. I mean, they can get pretty big. Preston, why don't we go ahead and take a quick break? When we come back, we'll definitely get into some more ufology and that sort of thing, but I do want to talk to you about your ghost hunting, because I've always known you as a UFO researcher, but I didn't know you as a ghost hunter, so we can talk about that also.
Great, looking forward to it.
Same here. This is Beyond the Strange. I am your host, Dave Cruz, and we'll be back right after this with more Preston Dennett. Don't go away. We'll be right back right after this.
Hey, this is Deb, and you're listening to Dave Cruz on Beyond the Strange Radio.
I warn you, this could scare you, as the sound bothers me to listen to. It has always haunted me. What you are about to hear is very disturbing indeed.
I've seen the Martians eat.
What in heaven's name is it?
I don't know. Beyond the Strange.
Have you ever looked skyward and pondered UFOs, aliens, time travel, alternate universes, and parallel dimensions? Want to explore paranormal activities, ghost hauntings, various cryptoids, such as Bigfoot, sea, and lake monsters? Greetings, Beyonders. I'm author Casper Parks, and you are listening to Beyond the Strange with host Dave Cruz. Help spread the word by posting links in forums and social media. Available at Spreaker.com, YouTube, and Google Hangouts.
Hey, this is Deb, and you're listening to Dave Cruz on Beyond the Strange Radio.
Once again, I just want to thank Preston Dennett for being here on the show tonight. Thank you again, Preston. And you can find Preston's website. Did I say that right at the beginning? Is it prestondennett.weebly.com?
That's right.
And you can get more information, and I'm sure all kinds of different wonderful things on his website there. So you can go to prestondennett.weebly.com. And he's also on Facebook. Are you on Twitter? How about I let you do that? You go ahead and let us know where we can find you.
Well, yeah, you got it. I'm not on Twitter yet. I should probably learn how to do that. To tweet.
Tweeting. Always good.
I am on Facebook, and do have a website, which if you just Google my name, it should take you there.
Yes.
Got all my books there, and you can contact me through my website, actually.
All right. And again, I wanted to thank everyone that's in the chat room. They're having a good time in there and discussing all different types of things and topics. And I want to remind everyone, if they have a question, if anyone has a question, just go ahead and type that in caps, and that way I can get to your question right to Preston right away, and without having to go through all the comments and stuff. I can see that. So put your questions in caps, and I'll get your question right to Preston, and we'll go over that during the show. By the way, you just got I just got a text message for you. And Michael Freehawk Polani wanted to say, how's it going? So he's also a researcher, and he's listening in on the show. So thanks, Michael, for that. We got a lot of people in the chat room, and they are loving the show tonight. So this has been really great. Thanks again, Preston. Yeah, so let's talk about that. I mean, we talk about UFOs, we talk about aliens and ETs and all that kind of stuff. But what's your involvement as far as the paranormal with ghost research? Do you do ghosts? Do you do all types of research besides UFOs and ghosts?
Well, yeah, actually, I kind of got dragged into all kinds of paranormal because it became clear pretty early on they were related.
Okay.
Because the people I was interviewing, like, for an example, Sylvia was her name. She saw a UFO overhead. Her friend was there. It was an egg-shaped object, made a low buzzing noise, kind of moved on.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, wow, that's interesting, and we went over it and over it. And she's like, oh, and our house is haunted, by the way. I'm like, oh, it is? Okay. Now, this is a lady I'd known for years and years.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah. And she described this pretty intense haunting that really was targeted really on her. Her sister and mother had no experience with it. But she would hear this guy coughing in the bathroom, and then the toilet would flush by itself.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, and only happened when she was alone in the house. Person had died in the house, a couple of people.
Mm-hmm.
So it was possibly them, but at any rate, it scared the wits out of her enough. It happened enough times. They later rented the house out, and she was the landlord. And the renters call her up because they had this, experience where the lady was taking a shower, and the phone rings,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it turns out it's the husband. And he's like, hello. Well, she didn't answer the phone, but he could hear the song playing in the background that the wife was playing.
Okay.
And so then the phone hangs up, and the phone rings again, and this time she answers it, and it's the husband. And he's like, well, you just answered the phone. He's like, well, no, I didn't answer the phone.
Right.
He's like, well, I know you did because I heard the song and I can still hear it. And she's like, oh my God, and she cut the intruder. There was, but it was not a human intruder.
It was spirit.
Apparently. So that was like an early case.
Okay.
And I started to get more of them. Like one lady I was interviewed, they had encounters here in Reseda, not far from where I live, actually.
Uh-huh.
And they had this problem with a ghost too, where it would move the dressers in front of the door. and objects would be missing, and they'd have footsteps, and lights would be going on and off. They all described one incident where she dropped the keys to the garage in the center of the kitchen floor, hits the kitchen floor, and disappears. And they all saw it happen. And so, needless to say, they're still looking for it, even though they saw it disappear. And as they're looking for it, the door to the back opens and closes, which it can't do unless you actually do it
physically, right?
So they had that going on. And so, yeah, I'm like, gosh, well, if they're also having UFO experiences at the same time, there's got to be some connection here.
And have you? I mean, I've heard similar stories where I'm not sure if you ever spoke with a gentleman by the name of Byron Lacey, but he is a experiencer and a contactee where these guys, ETs, aliens, they visit him frequently, and they do these sort of things where they hide things from him, or sometimes they even leave little puncture marks on his skin. And when I hear this kind of activity that these ETs are doing, it reminds me of something of a poltergeist or a spiritual activity.
Yeah, I think it's important not to confuse those. Then there are a lot of researchers now who are like, this is all the same thing. I'm like, well, no, it's really not.
Okay.
Near-death experiences are not abductions.
Mm-hmm.
They're completely different, though they have some similarities.
Okay.
And abductions are not demonic. That's a haunting problem. Ghosts are not ETs.
Right.
These are separate things, and they're not like different manifestations of the same phenomena, I don't think. Because I've looked into all of them, and ghosts are ghosts. We know what they are. They're human spirits.
Mm-hmm.
We're pretty darn sure about that. And you can actually trace a lot of hauntings to actual people. I've been to enough haunted places, and I've looked into it for sure. Probably there was a really scary case in Van Nuys. That was one of my scariest cases, really, where these people moved into a haunted apartment. And they kept hearing pounding on the walls, and it was over and over and over again. And finally, the neighbor moves out because he said someone kept pounding on the walls.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're like, wow. And then started having moving objects, cold spots. They started seeing apparitions. They had a lot of witnesses to them. And at some point, these apparitions started attacking them and tried to possess them, and would come in and like enter their body.
Oh my God.
And scared the wits out of them.
Sure.
They couldn't breathe. They saw this awful face, in their mind when it's inside them. And so, yeah, I mean, it went to the full case of like possession. That was a bad case. It's completely different. The demonic haunting, the poltergeist haunting, follows a set pattern, as does, say, not a set pattern, but a basic pattern.
Uh-huh.
And so does a UFO contact case. We have, to the point where we can pretty much structure it and predict to a certain extent what people are going to experience. If, say, their house is haunted, or if they're a contactee, or if they're about to have a near-death experience, or any of this kind of stuff. But it is interesting that a lot of people who are having these are kind of thrown into a lot of it. It's not. They will have. It's not uncommon for a person to have a near-death experience and a UFO encounter, say, or a haunting. There does seem to be a bleed through that is a little strange, like Bigfoot UFO cases.
I hear a lot about that. Yep.
I mean, how do you explain? I've got a case up here in Canyon Country. Radiologist had this UFO landed in his kind of backyard. He says, there's nothing out there. There was blue and white lights. There's no way it could be anything. I don't know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
But the next day, his dogs go nuts. They're barking, and he himself can sense a presence of some very large creature in his backyard. And then he hears it howling, and he says it was no normal creature. There is wildlife up there, cougars and even bear, certainly at that time.
Right, but this is different.
But this was different, he said.
Uh-huh.
It was a very large howl, like from a barrel-chested creature, which he had never heard before. And he felt like, it was. He knew what it was thinking, and it knew what he was thinking.
Uh-huh.
So that's just one case. I got another case like that up in Acton, where a lady was having UFO encounters, and that was followed by a Bigfoot encounter. She actually took me out there, and we heard this thing roar. I heard it myself.
You heard it too.
Oh my God! I mean, she's like, it lives in this valley. We went up there, and she's like, I think it lives around here. I really do. And it was this big dark valley off on the edge of the national forest. And she lived in a semi-rural area that was not far from the freeway.
Right.
But it's a vast area. It really is. I know a history of Bigfoot reports. I looked it up, and this thing roared once. We had all our equipment. We were just getting it out because we were looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
And this thing roared again. I remember the first time I actually looked up, thinking, what the heck is that? A plane? Where is that coming from? Because you first hear a noise and you're like trying to pinpoint it.
Right. Sure.
And when it roared the second time, I pinpointed it right way up in this dark area that was just thick with foliage. There's no way you could get through it. I tried, and it was, of course, pitch black. It was a very dark night. But yeah, boy, I remember the thrill of it. She says it roared again. I'm pretty sure it was just twice. I wanted to stay, but she wouldn't let me. She's like, we're going. And I'm like,
forget about it.
Okay, we're going. But yeah, I mean, that was a Bigfoot case that I try to get as close as I can to the phenomena. I've seen UFOs. I know they're real. I've had my own sightings with them, not to the extent of the people I've interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
I can't claim a conscious onboard encounter or anything like that. But I can sure say I've had, 5 at least really impressive sightings. And as far as ghosts, I got as close to them as I could too. I went to these haunted places, heard some really, one time, this noise goes off in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to describe this noise, except I've heard other people describe it, as an explosion, but it sounded like pots and pans falling and glass breaking and little springs going off, doing, 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 and glass tinkling and just everything. It was a very loud, very kind of complex noise.
Sure.
And lasted a good 3 seconds, which is a long time.
That is a long time, yeah.
And we just looked at each other, and I went running into the kitchen. This is not my house.
Right.
And looked around. And it's a place I've been before.
Uh-huh.
Knew the place, but couldn't find anything wrong, and tried to duplicate the sound. And I know this is not a hoax. I know they don't have speakers set up or anything like that, because I know these people are sincere. But yeah, I heard it myself. That's the point. I'm like, wow, what? And I searched and tried to do. I couldn't do it. Probably the most interesting ghost investigation in terms of seeing stuff was visiting this physical medium who did table lifting.
Okay.
And I did that 4 or 5 times with her.
Right.
And it was crazy. From the outside, it didn't look that impressive until you actually do it. And because it looked like a little card table that you could push over.
Okay.
You could have. But she'd lay her hands on it and it would shake like crazy. And there were other people there, and I got to take a seat and feel this. And I'm like, finally, you guys if you don't mind, can I just do it with just, Donna, the medium?
Right.
I'm like, sure. And finally I got to the point and it always moved. I'm like, okay, just put one finger on the table, Donna, just one finger. And darn if that table would go shrunk right up to the side.
Oh my God.
And at some point I did get it to shake just under my hands alone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, let me try it now. And, keep your finger, and now remove it. This thing was shaking. So it was crazy. And this table would go back and forth and up and down or answer questions, which weren't super intelligent all the time. But there was, it would answer questions I couldn't quite believe the answer to. And it was interesting, though, because the personality would change depending on the spirit we were supposedly in contact with. And it would act differently. And I did all sorts of physical experiments to see if we could actually levitate the table. We never quite got it to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a great experiment and really convinced me, that there is a real, physical mediumship is a real thing.
Right. And I've heard lots of stories like that, and I've also heard lots of stories that it's possible that it's not necessarily a spirit or a ghost, but projected energy by the person themselves. Have you ever heard of that phenomena?
Yeah, and I'm not sure I believe that, because of what I think we're seeing with like poltergeist cases and disturbed adolescents and
Right.
things like this. Some of those people, a good case is Matthew Manning. He would have a huge poltergeist. That's a case up in England back in the 50s or so. Ended up being a medium. And sometimes this turns out to be uncontrolled mediumship, or people who have mediumistic powers, or the ability to dissociate perhaps and cause psychokinetic activity. But it does seem to be spirit related in most cases. Yeah, I think people do have the ability to do telekinesis and levitate. I've looked a lot into that sort of thing for sure. We do have those powers, and those have been demonstrated by, particularly the holy people of each culture, whatever you want to call them, medicine men or women, or nuns and priests, sorcerers, that sort of thing. All those superhuman abilities we can do.
I want to shift gears a little bit, and I wanted to ask you, when it comes to getting back to a little bit with the UFOs, I want to throw in a little bit of conspiracy theory, and the reason why I know I don't know if you tend to want to shy away from that, but when it comes to a lot of these so-called government projects, I am particularly fascinated right now more than ever with Project Blue Book, and because of course it has a lot to do with the History Channel's take on it. I think they definitely over exaggerate some of the cases and take liberties with the stories, and to make it more entertaining. Plus they throw a storyline in it like it's the Cold War, beginning of the Russia versus US cloak and dagger type thing, and you have your the espionage, the spies, but you also have the Men in Black. Well, some of the first encounters with them during this era, if you will. What can you tell us about those types of projects with UFOs and ETs, Preston?
Well, Blue Book is just one of many government projects where we've spent a lot of money to research this in an official capacity. There was the Condon Committee, of course, which was a complete disaster, and Blue Book itself was a disaster. Started as the Project Grudge, and initially started before that as mapping the Alaska area, the ice caps, and they kept seeing these objects and sort of shifted their gears and started looking into it. At any rate, it was supposedly this Blue Book. It's very interesting what happened. I'm not sure people know the whole story about it, but it was an official project at first, but it became pretty clear to the people involved that it was not the official project, that in reality it was sort of a publicity front to handle this onslaught of reports that kept coming in, while the real research went on elsewhere. It was
kind of like a screen in a way.
Yeah.
Smoke screen.
Exactly. But it was to investigate UFOs, and the people were in charge of that, and we're supposed to seriously look into it. But when they got a real good case, usually they weren't getting them. The cases with photographs, and the landing traces, and all those were routed elsewhere to like the Air Technical Intelligence Command. While they did get a bunch of cases, and were apparently had the orders to sort of debunk them.
Right.
And this is where J. Allen Hynek, and this is what the Blue Book show is getting across effectively. I wish it was more accurate. But that they had a policy to attack the witness. There's a good example of a landing that was seen by a Air Force officer in Nevada. Driving along, his car stalls. He sees these 3 discs that are landed there. He gets out of his car, walks up to them, and they take off. And he describes this to his superior, and they spend all their time, trying to psychologically evaluate him rather than examine the incident when they know full well it's real.
Right.
And when someone saw Venus, well, they're like, let's send everybody out. Let's put, let's go all out on this one.
Right.
And let's talk about this, and so cases that were, prosaic got a lot of attention, and anything that hinted at a good story didn't, and often got ridiculous, obviously debunking explanations like geese or swamp gas or Venus. And it was really hoaxes, hallucinations, misperceptions became the rule. Anything anyone sees, it's one of those. Hoaxes, hallucinations, or misperceptions. And to reach the point that J. Allen Hynek couldn't take it. He quit, and he wrote his own book. And then he wrote another, and became really the grandfather of ufology, and pushed this movement into a whole, a new level where it was being taken seriously. There was very few people doing that. James McDonald, he was an atmospheric physicist. He did his best, and it was a huge, in the UFO movement. Jim and Coral Lorenzen did the best they could. But initially, it was very hard to get this subject out into the public eye.
When they show, especially when they show Allen Hynek, and they show, I want to say his character on the show. They portray him as being the godfather of all the ufology research. Even suggested that he coined the phrase UFOs, which I believe was Kenneth Arnold that really came up with the term first.
It was around that time. I think it was some reporter. I'm not sure, but it was from the Arnold incident.
It wasn't Hynek though, but that's the
no.
Right.
He came up with the first, second, third kind.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. But
right?
I mean, he in my world, he's kind of like a geek fandom type, hero in a way. So I kind of like the way they portray him in this.
Initially he wasn't. He was towing the Air Force line. He did not believe in UFOs.
Right.
But he kept hearing like, it looked like a lit up hamburger, looked like an ice cream cone, and weird. And he saw this thing, escalation of hypothesis, where they're like, well, it's not a plane, it wasn't a helicopter, it wasn't a balloon, and they're like looking for something. And he kept seeing how they had a lot of trouble describing what they were seeing. And he started to become a real believer. It's an interesting story, and I think he is a hero for sure.
Right.
In this field.
Also, you have the disinformation attempts as well, like Richard Doty and a few of those other people who have misled. Now, and see, I tend to get confused because I thought that he was really giving good information, but yet he was pretending that it was disinformation so he didn't get in trouble. And so what where does it begin, where does it end? What do you believe? Is he telling the truth, or was he just making it up so he doesn't end up swimming with the fishes, if you will?
Well, that's the best kind of disinformation, isn't it? I mean, if you really want to get a heavy duty story out, make sure it looks completely ridiculous, sort of thing. And disinformation is clearly a thing in this field, unfortunately. And it's hard. I mean, it's very hard, I think, to differentiate a lot of this stuff and sort of discern it, how real it is. Like the alien autopsy, which we know is, does happen.
Sure.
And has happened. And so what we saw probably is very close to what happens all the time. And could very well be real, but if not, it's not that far off for sure. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's sort of this information disinformation thing, saying that puts the idea out there, makes it look ridiculous, but gets people used to it, and has sort of it's a double-edged sword.
Do you often write about that in your books, to kind of help people, along to understand that this is something that people need to, I don't want to say take it with a grain of salt, or do your own research, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I try to be very objective in my books.
That's what I meant.
I don't have an agenda, say, like trying to necessarily, I mean, you can like raise a theory and present cases that support it. But I try to let people make their own decisions and just really be as objective as possible. Because I don't know if the ETs are our friends or not. I try to let the witnesses speak for themselves. Most of the witnesses I've talked to don't feel the ETs are like evil. Just saying. And I personally don't think they're demonic. I looked into the whole demon thing and read up on it. And I do believe that there are awful spirits like that and evil forces. But I don't think that the Greys are them. It's completely different phenomena when someone has a demonic haunting as opposed to an abduction experience.
Yeah, and I think I've heard enough research and researchers talk about the Greys as they're not necessarily evil, but they're also almost programmed, like they're robotic, like they do the dirty work sometimes of other ET races. That's kind of what I've heard and understand. I don't know if you heard the same thing or not. Sometimes
I get all kinds of a wide variation, really. Some are gentle and sweet, and people feel this incredible sense of love, a love that they've never experienced before, even, or peace, or good feelings for sure. So you have a bell curve that's pretty close to human. I would say, I mean, really not that far off. Yeah, people do have unpleasant encounters, for sure. It does happen, and people can come away from it medically damaged. But I also know that they can, be healed. That's the subject of my new book. People who have had healings.
Right.
So that occurs as well. And some of these people say, yeah, they were totally friendly. They were my friends. So you get a bell curve. I don't get a lot of cases or really any, of sadism, or I'm gonna torture you and I like it. No, we don't see that. What we see are people being treated like lab rats.
Yes,
that does happen, or with a kind of an arrogance and no bedside manner, or just really at all. Like they got a job to do and they got to get
non-existent.
But if someone's screaming in pain,
yes,
not at all unusual. One of the Greys puts their hand on the forehead and the pain is gone.
Oh wow,
that's very common.
Okay,
so that's good, right?
Yeah.
And when the ETs talk, and they do, and it's usually just that, don't be afraid, we won't hurt you, you won't remember this type of thing. When it's beyond that, as I said earlier, it's basically really positive. They have messages to give, and it's usually like, stop using those nuclear weapons in the way you are. You're causing real problems with your wars. You're polluting your planet. You're going to run out of water. The atmosphere is getting poisoned, this sort of thing. And that's universal. I don't care if you're talking about Greys or Mantids or Nordics or the contactees from the 50s, or it's always that. Which I find kind of interesting. And
it's all true. I mean, we are destroying our planet for sure.
It's good advice. I'm like, so they're not like, trying to be mean. A demonic spirit tries to destroy people and hurt them. And this is one of the reasons why I don't think we're dealing with, something that's demonic. And I say that because there's a lot of people out there who actually do believe that theory.
Yeah, I've heard that theory as well.
And it's I'm just telling you, no, I don't think so. I really
No,
don't.
right.
And if for that matter, if we can find one of these flying saucers in an air base at Norton, at Area 51, at Edwards, or Wright-Patterson, or all these other places we know are there, all bets are off. We know it's alien now because there's the craft. You can't tell me that's a ghost. You know what I mean? You can fly it around. It's got technology that we can use, and you can see it was constructed. And there's the body. Well, I mean, now we know what we're dealing with, and it's not a strange phenomena. It's something like us, but different. And I think that's what the evidence is really showing us that we're dealing with, is just your plain classic ETs. And as far as where they come from, well, yeah, I think that they do have bases here, undersea bases. I think that they probably have bases on the moon. That wouldn't surprise me. Or large motherships and other planets for sure.
Let's talk about some of that with the underwater bases. When did you start learning about them? Around the same time as the other UFO sightings and research?
Yeah, right away. I started. This lady tells me about this object floating there on the ocean. She turns to her friend, says, "What's that?" It takes off straight up. And, it's floating on the water kind of there. And another guy lives right in Malibu, kept seeing these lights out there in the water. He called the Coast Guard. He says, "The boat's on fire." We're like, "No, there's nothing out there, squid fishermen." He's like, "That's not squid fishermen." Who he's seen,
Right.
So started to get early reports and wrote about it in my book, UFOs Over California. I devoted a whole chapter to it because I collected a bunch of them.
Right.
And excerpted that for Fate magazine, saying, "Is there an undersea UFO base?" Because I had more reports. I had some reports involving hundreds of objects, right? So where are all these objects coming from? And they're not coming from above. These people are describing them coming from below. In some cases, the water itself. And not just, one person. I've got 4 cases involving like 50 or 100 objects. So that's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
And some people, a couple of abductees who said that they were taken not into a UFO, but underground. So all these little things started to click into place. I plotted all the cases on a map, and they're all clustered sort of off between Catalina Island and the mainland. That's really deep water there. It gets up to a mile deep, actually. It's generally around 3,000, 2,000 to 3,000, up to 5,000. So pretty deep. And I talked to a submarine navigator. He told me an amazing story. I talked to a Coast Guard captain. I talked to several naval officers. So I was really fortunate to get some incredible interviews with a lot of these guys who saw some crazy stuff. And then, of course, that Malibu anomaly came out.
Right. I was going to mention that. That was Point Doom, right?
Yeah, this weird structure. Yeah, look, with pillars. And lo and behold, it's right where I'd plotted all these cases, and I was kind of predicting there was something there, and there it was. And at that point, I had a couple of whistleblowers saying, "Yeah, there is a base there. The military and the Greys work together," said one lady. Another said, well, a couple said that there were tunnels, that a tunnel leads from Edwards to Area 51 to the Santa Catalina Channel.
Right.
The San Pedro Channel is actually what it's called. Yeah, I mean, I had those reports. So all those kind of added up and that's sort of the gist of what this book is about that I put together.
Okay.
And I'm going to say, mile for mile, this area is one of the top producers of USOs, unidentified submersible objects, really in the world. I mean, there's Puerto Rico has a lot. Some areas, Costa Rica, Gulf Breeze at one time did have a lot. There are cases all over the world. I put some of these in the book, actually. Some in like little lakes, and there's a lake in Arkansas, Lake Hamilton, out of Hot Springs.
On the Great Lakes, they tend to have a lot of UFO sightings. Right.
But this one area, boy, there's the Pacific Coast Highway, kind of runs down from Santa Barbara all the way to Rancho Palos Verdes.
Uh-huh.
That you can't go a mile where, there's not a sighting along that highway looking out into the water of these objects, going into the water, coming out, floating on the water, or just underneath the water. Like 5 cases where they target boats, where they come right under the boat or over it in a few cases. So all kinds of cases, like that. There's definitely something down there.
What about military sightings? I mean, can you get your hands on that type of data where, the Navy or Marines have these sightings of USOs?
Yeah, one guy I talked to this was not in this area, but it was such a great story. Ray Sachs was his name. He was an electrician's mate on the USS Clamagore, which was a submarine. He had been on other submarines, but got on the Clamagore, and this thing carries nuclear weapons. And he started to have unusual encounters. Like one time the engines went off for no reason, which have double emergency backups. There's no way. Another time, and he was on watch, and they're heading up this was like 1971, heading up the East Coast at 12 knots, pretty far out there on the surface. And he's up there, the captain's up there, the second in command, and another person's on watch, 4 people. And this USO shows up. He says, at 100 knots, comes booking up from the rear, the stern, and starts pacing the Clamagore just off, 20 feet away, 40, I forget exactly what he said, but it wasn't far. And it was a big, big white object glowing right under the water there, not deep. And the captain's freaking out. He's like, what's that? He turns to Ray, like, what do the sonar guys see? And the sonar guys saw nothing. That's what they told Ray. We're not seeing anything here.
Right.
And this thing paces the submarine for the next 15 minutes as each of the higher ranking officers comes up and looks at this thing. Wow, don't know what it is. Goes back below. And Ray and the other guy on watch are talking about it. And the second in command turns to them and says, will you guys shut up? Don't talk about this. And he turns, and then it scoots off, and he turns to the captain, the second in command.
Right.
Captain, this is according to Ray. Captain, how do you want me to report this in the log? And the captain says, officers who report this sort of thing do not move up in rank.
Wow.
And so it wasn't reported.
Of course.
And the second in command turns to, the other guy says, don't talk about this. Say nothing. And Ray goes below, and of course, everyone's all over them, jumps on their backs. What'd you see? What'd you see? It's already news. Everyone in the ship knows. And so they told exactly what they saw, which was this weird object. And I have to believe, the captain did report this to his superiors confidentially, maybe. I would hope, because that's why he's there. Literally, I mean, that is his kind of his job, to guard the shores, right?
Yep.
And this is very in your face, but really, not hostile in the sense that, they did anything. So again, I think that speaks towards the ET agenda, which is not hostile, clearly, or otherwise, we would be seeing it.
They really just want us to know that there's a presence. They want their presence known.
Yeah, but it wasn't us. I mean, this is the leading submarine at the time. I mean, it's not us.
Right.
And a crazy case. And I bet this happens a lot, because another guy I contacted, his name was Gary. He was on the USS Long Beach on the far side of Catalina. And there were these UFOs right there, sort of off the horizon a little bit, pretty far away, but not that far. I mean, it was within view. There were giant lights pulsating. They had a weird notch kind of taken out of them. And the entire ship was just going crazy. He tried to contact the bridge. They wouldn't talk to him. They said, we're too busy. And he couldn't find out if they were on radar or not. But he said he definitely saw them, and a lot of people saw them. He was a great witness. Another naval officer, and that the USS Long Beach is nuclear powered again. So there you see that pattern.
Yes.
But I mean, one guy, the submarine navigator I talked to, he was actually trying to ferry a ship, a small boat, for a wealthy owner up the coast. A couple of boats. He was in a convoy. And he and a friend who was also in the Navy were in the back boat when they lost touch of the front boat, at which point they saw this USO in front of them. And they couldn't identify it. It was just this weird light in the water, and it was in an area where they knew there were rocks, and it was very shallow water.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, well, this is impossible. What could this possibly be in the water in that area? It would be utterly stupid. Could it be wrecked? They're thinking all these things. And suddenly all their electronics fail or start to act strange, right? Their depth sounder says they're like in 10 feet.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Which they know they're not. They knew where they were, but the thing is reading it. So they have to basically head out to sea. I'm thinking the UFO did this. He didn't say that, but I've seen this sort of thing. And it's a way of diverting a person.
Of course, yeah.
I'm thinking, right? I'm speculating here, but they kind of turn. And next thing they know, they're confused. They're disoriented. This thing is in front of them now. Mind you, it's a pretty stormy night. It's dark. It's a dark, stormy night. And they're trying to get past this thing, and it's coming right towards them. So they stop, and it comes right alongside them, maybe a quarter mile away, which is very close navally. You don't get that close to another ship, particularly if it's large.
Right.
And they could not identify it. And it wasn't a normal ship. It had stadium type lights, he said, and really crazy lights. And it was so bright and it was reflecting off the waves, and he couldn't really make out the shape of it. But it was not normal in any way that he could possibly. And he really wanted to drive that point home, that this was not us, right? And it stopped. It basically had to sort of standoff with them because they're stopped at this point. And they're just looking at each other, and finally they couldn't take it. They just take off.
Mm-hmm.
He says no missing time. I wonder, because he had a moment of real disorientation and the UFO changed position.
Could be, yeah.
Where he thought it was. The other witness would not talk to me, but this guy gave a great interview. And I don't know if there's missing time or not, but man, it's an incredible case.
Very incredible. And is there any noises that any of these UFOs make where witnesses would say it was a humming noise, it was a whirring noise, it was no noise?
Yeah, I get variations. It's often no noise. I would say that's most common.
Uh-huh.
But when these things are really close, I hear things like a whispering, a whooshing, an electrical buzz, like a refrigerator,
Uh-huh.
but a little bit more musical, perhaps, or thrumming. But generally, no. Generally, not even that. Occasionally, you get outliers. One guy, like a blender, it's really loud. And one, like I told you, had musical tones. That was like the only one I've gotten of that. But occasionally, beeps and things. Pretty darn rare, though. So yeah, no. But sometimes people can, like a sub-audible feeling, like just this deep kind of bass, almost thrumming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is really what impresses witnesses when you see something that's the size of a large building sort of lying on its side above you, and it's totally silent, and it's got lights all over it, so it's not a balloon, right? It really shakes people up, the silence of it.
And that kind of leads me to believe that the ones that are more silent, that don't make noise, are the ones that are off planet. And what I mean by that, it's not us, it's not military. I'm not saying that our military couldn't make anything that wouldn't make noise, but I would tend to lean more towards it is definitely alien technology and not Earth technology.
Yeah, well, I think most of what people are seeing is alien technology, for the point that, generally speaking, the military doesn't lift cars off the highway or hover over someone's house and light everything up inside. So, you know what I mean? Or
yeah, no, I get it.
Chase you down the road and put on displays over large crowds of people. It's contrary, especially if it's an advanced aircraft. Those, they like to, keep quiet. as best as they can. And you can go to air shows. My brother was a huge fan, and he took me to several of them. My dad loved them too. And you can see some of this advanced aircraft. And I think we do have some of it, but to the level that people are experiencing, I'm going to say the vast majority of what they're probably experiencing is extraterrestrials, really.
Yes, absolutely. I think that, again, you know, most of these craft that we see, I don't think we can match, even if they do share technology with us. I don't think they share all their technology with us.
Yeah, I think there's some of that going on. I mean, that's my understanding with the rumors, with the Greys and the meetings and the abductions and all of this, where, you know, our government allowed abductions to occur and would look the other way as long as the ETs didn't expose themselves in any, you know, large way, and gave them technology. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's certainly, I've heard it enough where, you know, you certainly have to wonder, and it does fit what we seem to have going on. The abduction phenomenon, I think, is still a cutting edge of UFO research, as well as the disclosure movement, and the technology that's coming out of this stuff. I think that's another really an area where we're going to start seeing lots of change as the high level technology gets released. And probably we have seen some of it in computers and lasers.
I was going to mention, what about AI as well?
Exactly. And some people have really, you know, gone through efforts to link this stuff together, and it's been difficult to do.
Of course.
Certainly Colonel Corso made his claims, some of which can be debunked in terms of, you know, how inventions were made.
Right.
But he says straight out that some, you know, fiber optics, and he named all these things, night vision, integrated circuit, which were inspired or came from Roswell, and that was his job. And he's a pretty high level guy, and which you can't really debunk very easily at all. People tried, but they, in my mind, weren't really successful in debunking him.
Right. And you know, when you talk about the technology as well, do you ever look into people that were inspired? I would think by ET, like Tesla. Or,
yeah.
You know.
Absolutely. I mean, I got an amazing case from Inside UFOs. This guy, Jim Kubelbeck, was a engineer, an electronics specialist, I believe, in the Navy. And, you know, young and fresh out of college, and learned all this stuff, and was part of the submarine hunter squadron, and knew how to identify aircraft, and was, you know, a trained observer. And was out on the deck one night smoking a cigarette when these UFOs show up, these very bright lights. So he rushes down below deck to get his binoculars and call some other witnesses. And all his friends start joking at him. They're like, you're going to find out. You know, he hadn't opened his binoculars. He bought them on shore leave. And as did a lot of people who got ripped off and found out their packages were rocks. And so they were kidding him about that. You're going to find out your binoculars are nothing but rocks. And he opens them up, and they're brand new binoculars. And they're like, And he's like, come with me on deck. There's UFOs. And they're like, yeah, right. But a few got up, you know? And he's like, really, come. And so he got about, you know, 10, 15 people up there looking at these objects, which were lights, flat, you know, big, bright lights pulsating. You couldn't really see like an object in the classic sense. And he calls the bridge and is like, what are those lights? And they're like, what lights? He goes down below and, you know, calls them up. And I kind of gave him the runaround. Then he calls up the bridge again, and they're like, there's no one up here right now. He's like, no one up here? No one on the bridge? I'm like, we can't talk to you right now. We're busy. And so he hangs up. He got the runaround. And suddenly the ship turns and the lights fade off.
Right.
And everyone goes, you know, basically to bed. And the next day he checks the call sheet, I forget the name of the ship, Valley Forge, or I forget what it was. At any rate, he checks the news sheet rather, and there's nothing, of course, about the sighting. He calls the bridge, and they're like, "What sighting? No, we don't know what you're talking about. Nothing. Nope, nothing here in the log. Blah blah blah."
Wow.
He's like, "What?" He's like, "Well, where's the guy I was talking to last night?"
Yeah.
And gives him the name. I'm like, "Oh, him. He's flown off ship on shore leave."
Oh, really? How convenient.
And like, which never happens. You know,
Right.
someone's not picked up for shore leave. You know, that doesn't happen. It would have to be an emergency.
Yeah, right.
At any rate, they either lied or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's lying there. He goes up the next night and he's pulling out his binoculars, right? He's going to go out on deck and see if the UFOs are back. And he's pulling out his binoculars, and his friends turn to him and says, Jim's going to find out if he bought rocks or not. And he looks at him strangely, like, "What are you talking about?"
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, you're going to find out if you bought rocks or not." Like, I was like, "Guys, they're binoculars. You were there last night. Remember? We saw UFOs." They're like, "What? No, we didn't. No." And these are the people who are on deck watching the objects.
Right.
And he's like freaking out at this point. And he's like getting really angry because he thought they were kidding, but they weren't. And finally he found it. A guy's like, "Yeah, I remember that.
Uh-huh.
I remember the lights." And but most didn't. There was like one or two guys and who remembered anything. And that really upset him. So he goes up on deck, doesn't see anything at all. Goes back. He's getting ready to go to bed. And suddenly he remembers a quote dream he had that night before when he went to bed, which he feels wasn't a dream. It was contact. He was taken on board a craft and described, human-looking figures who took him to an engine room. I'm shortening this.
Yes.
Took him to an engine room and basically explained how this engine worked and gave him a long lecture, really, about fossil fuels and the various uses of how humans have used energy throughout the years, and that there are other alternative sources of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And showed him this engine. And he remembered them showing him before in other like dreams, kind of. It was like weird. It's like, gosh, this seems really familiar to me. And they're like, you could build this. And he ended up going home. He didn't tell anyone for like 30 years. Finally told his wife and children, like, this happened to me. And he was inspired to build this sort of free motion device, a perpetual motion device. Bought some magnets. It's always magnets with these guys. And a bicycle wheel, and went to the hardware store, picked up odds and ends as best as he could, and created this perpetual motion device, which he seemed embarrassed about, as he told me, but said this thing would actually spin and spin and spin for weeks, which his family verified. So I thought it was really interesting.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
I couldn't get any more information, about it, because I've talked. This is a thing for sure. I wrote a whole chapter on this called "If You Build It," where in case after case, people are shown how UFO engines work and try to build it.
Yes.
Whitley Strieber described a case where a farmer did this and turned his machine on, and everything that was metal in the barn went right towards it, and it exploded, burned the whole thing down. And so there's a whole scattering of cases like this in the literature. It's really interesting. And that happened to Jim Kubelbeck, and it was funny, just on an end note, as he's leaving the ship, he's talking to one of the guys who remembers seeing the lights. He's like, "Gosh, remember that UFO? Wasn't that the weirdest thing we saw?" Jim's telling him this, and his friend says, "Yeah, that sure was weird. And you know what? I had some really weird dreams that night,
Him too. Wow. Imagine what they can build together, huh?
Yeah. And Jim's like, "Wow," but he never got to talk to him, and it's one of the biggest regrets of his life.
Oh yeah, I'll bet. Absolutely. And that's amazing. I have talked to people who have that those sort of inspirations, contact, downloads is the buzzword I've heard the last couple of years. With information from ETs to make some sort of device of free energy or something like that. And I think that's just amazing. I really hope it happens and we do get away from fossil fuels. We are fools for not finding this, this free energy. But Preston, we're at the end, man. I knew this 2 hours is just going to fly right by. Can you once again please let everyone know where they can find you and your writings and all of your information?
Hey, I really appreciate that. Yeah, I had a blast. If you want to reach me, Google my name. The actual website address is prestondennett.weebly.com. And excerpts of my books are there. I've got all kinds of stuff on the website. You can contact me. Love to hear from people, whether they got a comment or they have a story they want to share or a question. But yeah, I really appreciate you having me on the show. It's awesome.
It's been wonderful, man. I really dig the time we had tonight. And what appearances are you going to be at this year?
I'm possibly going to do a UFO cruise. It's called the UFO cruise. That depends on if enough people sign up. And yeah, if I can get people to refer my name, then they'll pay my way and I'll go.
Right on.
But otherwise, probably I'm not sure at this point. It's still tentative, but that's a definite possibility. There are some other possible speaking engagements up north, perhaps one in Washington in the end of June.
Okay.
Which has not been finalized yet. So I've got some stuff up in the air. I'm going to do a shoot with the Travel Channel.
Oh, sweet.
Coming up this month, actually. So that's another show, which we'll see if it goes up on the air. Often they don't,
right.
when you do this stuff. But yeah, all kinds of stuff going on. New book out. So yeah.
Oh, awesome. Right on. Let's definitely get you back on the show and we'll go over that book and talk all about that.
Hey, you got it. Thanks.
All right. Thanks again, Preston. Hope you have a good night and we'll keep in touch, my friend.
Absolutely.
All right. Have a good night.
Bye.
That's Preston Dennett. And what an amazing, awesome interview. I am just like blown away with all that information. Thanks again, everyone. I really appreciate everybody in the chat who shared. And remember, please leave a like. You got comments after the show. If you're listening to this while the show is over, after the show, leave your comments and likes and questions, whatever you need. And you can always write me, Dave@beyondthestrange.com, if you have any questions. So thanks again. Beyond the Strange is owned and copyrighted by Dave Cruz and cannot be simulcast, rebroadcasted, or copied without written consent of Beyond the Strange. Also, the views and opinions are not necessarily that of Beyond the Strange. Hosts, guests, affiliated networks, listeners are encouraged to conduct research and formulate their own opinions. Thank you once again, everyone. Have a great night. Hasta.